Lena's heart pounded as Derek's voice echoed from the kitchen, the cruel words searing into her like a fire. "Send the fat girl," he sneered. But as she approached the bikers, the unthinkable happened. They didn't laugh. They didn't mock. Instead, one of them, a man named Ryder, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You all right, ma'am?" What happened next would turn her life upside down. Could Lena finally escape the torment she'd endured for months? Hey, if you're loving this story, a quick like or subscribe goes a long way in helping me keep creating. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every message, and it always makes my day. Lena Brooks stood behind the counter, wiping the last of the grease off a stack of plates, her movements slow and mechanical. The constant hum of the diner, the clinking of silverware, the sizzling sound from the kitchen, it all blended into a monotonous background noise. She'd grown accustomed to it, like she'd grown accustomed to the sneers and mockery from the kitchen staff and, more painfully, her boss. Derek Hammond, the owner of the diner, liked to joke at Lena's expense. But it wasn't funny, it was cruel. A part of her had grown numb to his words, but another part, the part that still longed for approval and a little respect, felt every jab deeply. The mocking laughter of the other staff as they mimicked her awkward movements, the whispers when she passed by, it had all become a familiar torture. Lena was 24. She had round cheeks and soft, tired eyes, and her body was heavy, more than she could bear to look at in the mirrors of the diner's backroom. Her uniform, a faded black and white checkered shirt and black pants, strained across her frame. She kept her posture hunched, as if trying to make herself as small as possible, invisible to the customers, and most importantly, to Derek. She had been working here for 6 months now, serving greasy burgers and watery coffee to truck drivers, families on road trips, and the occasional lost tourist. They didn't notice her, or if they did, it was only to make a comment on her weight or her clumsy movements. Her feet ached from hours on end, her heart ached from the ridicule, but she had no other choice. She had to keep working. She had to prove that she could survive this job, this town, this life. Every night after work, she would go home, curl up in her small apartment, and count the tips she'd saved in a coffee can hidden under the floorboard. $2,300 more and she could finally leave. Culinary school, a new life, a place where she wouldn't be the fat girl or the joke. But every time she thought about quitting, every time Derek made her feel worthless, that small, fragile dream felt farther and farther away. She couldn't afford to leave, not yet. Not until she had enough to start over. Today, like every other day, she kept her head down and tried to blend into the background, focusing on her work, pretending the laughter and the insults didn't pierce through her skin like tiny daggers. But she couldn't ignore the voice of Derek, booming from the kitchen. "Send the fat girl!" Derek's voice rang out over the noise of the diner, loud enough for Lena to hear from where she was standing at the counter. "Let's see how fast those boys run her off." The kitchen staff erupted into laughter at his words, their eyes flicking over to Lena as they snickered behind their hands. Lena's stomach dropped, and she felt the heat of embarrassment rush to her cheeks. Her fingers went numb as she gripped the plate in front of her. This wasn't the first time Derek had made cruel remarks about her. But this was different. She could hear Derek's booming voice again, louder now. "Bet the bikers will be gone in 5 minutes after they see her waddling over to them." His laughter followed, mocking her without mercy. The kitchen staff chuckled again, the sound of their mockery gnawing at her insides. She had no choice but to look up at him, hoping for any sign of a joke. But his gaze was cold and indifferent. Her hands shook as she grabbed the notepad, trying to ignore the hot tears that threatened to spill. She forced her feet to move, even though every part of her screamed to run out the door. She had no choice. She had to comply. Lena's eyes lowered to the floor as she made her way toward the door. She heard the bikers before she saw them, the roaring engines, the rumble of heavy boots against the cracked pavement outside. They had pulled into the diner parking lot an hour ago, 4 of them. A group of men who looked like they'd come straight out of a wild, untamed world. Tattoos, leather jackets, and the unmistakable sense that they belonged to something darker than a roadside diner. She had no idea who they were, but Derek's cruel words made it clear he thought they'd be the perfect audience for his latest joke. As she stepped out onto the diner floor, the bright light from the windows reflected off the white tile and the gleaming chrome of the kitchen, but her eyes never left the floor. She moved swiftly toward the corner of the diner where the bikers sat. Two in the corner booth, the other two at the bar. Lena stopped in front of their table, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing her, waiting for the inevitable joke. She was ready for the teasing, ready for the mockery. She'd been ready for it all her life, but then a voice cut through the tension. "You all right, ma'am?" The voice was deep, calm, and unexpectedly kind. Lena's head shot up, and she met the eyes of the man who spoke, Ryder Cole. He was sitting at the end of the booth, his dark, scruffy beard and rough, muscular frame immediately catching her attention. His eyes were an intense gray, cool and discerning. There was a quiet authority in his gaze that contrasted sharply with the rowdy, rough bikers around him. His calm demeanor felt out of place amongst the chaos of the table, but it was also strangely comforting. Lena blinked, unsure of how to respond. Her throat tightened, and she could feel the heat of humiliation creeping up her neck. Was he mocking her? Was this just another cruel joke like Derek had planned? She stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. "You need a minute to catch your breath?" Ryder's voice softened, almost too gentle. "You look like you've had a long day." The others at the table fell silent, watching the exchange. Diesel, Mac, and Jax, all rough, muscular men, exchanged glances, but Ryder's voice held a quiet weight that commanded respect. He wasn't looking at her with disdain or mockery like the others. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't treating her like the joke Derek had made her out to be. Lena swallowed, trying to collect herself. Her hands trembled as she set the menu down, not knowing whether to be angry, confused, or relieved. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to be treated with respect. Not by these men, not by anyone. Lena started, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm fine, thank you." Ryder's gaze softened, and he nodded, giving her space to gather her thoughts. "No rush, ma'am. We'll take it easy on you. You can sit with us for a minute if you'd like." Lena felt a strange warmth spread across her chest. She was almost afraid to look up, to acknowledge the unexpected kindness in his voice. She wanted to step back, retreat into her shell, but something about Ryder's gaze, steady, respectful, made her hesitate. For the first time that day, she felt like someone had seen her for who she was, not for her weight or her awkwardness. Ryder turned his attention to the menu, and the other bikers followed suit, muttering amongst themselves, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. Lena took a step back, unsure of how to process the sudden shift in atmosphere. She glanced down at her notepad and realized she had forgotten why she was there in the first place. She had come to serve, but she wasn't sure she was ready to leave just yet. Ryder's voice broke through her thoughts. "Take your time, all right? We're not going anywhere." Lena nodded slowly, her heart still racing, but this time the feeling was different. Instead of dread, she felt a strange sense of calm. Ryder had said it wasn't a rush, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a joke. Lena stood at the edge of the booth, her heart pounding against her ribs. The laughter from the kitchen staff echoed in her ears, and the harshness of Derek's words played on repeat in her mind. "Send the fat girl." She could almost feel the weight of their mocking stares, even though they were now a distant memory in the back of her mind. This was worse. The bikers, the table where Derek had sent her to face her humiliation. As she approached, the loud voices of the men at the table reached her, the clinking of glass bottles and the rough, hearty laughter that followed every jibe. She knew what was coming. It was like a script she had read before. She had played the part of the joke, the fat girl everyone else felt comfortable laughing at. But this time it was different. She could feel her palms sweat, her feet dragging with every step. When she reached the table, the bikers were talking amongst themselves, leaning back in their seats with their arms folded or resting on the backs of the chairs. They were huge, each one wearing their leather vests and tattoos, some with rough beards, others clean-shaven. It was a stark contrast to the mundane diner crowd she was used to. The air felt thick with their presence, each one seemingly larger than life. Her voice faltered as she cleared her throat. Can I get you gentlemen started with some drinks? The bikers looked up at her, and for a brief moment, the laughter died down. Diesel, the tallest of the group, raised an eyebrow as he took in her appearance. A rough snicker escaped from Mac, and Jax leaned back in his chair, eyes glinting with amusement. Lena could feel it, the first wave of mockery coming on strong. She lowered her gaze, pretending to focus on the notepad in her hand, even as her ears burned with the intensity of their stares. She tried to smile, but it felt tight, strained. So, what's the deal with the fat girl? Diesel grunted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The others chuckled, as expected. Her stomach churned. She couldn't back down now. She couldn't afford to let them see her hurt. She'd been through enough, learned to endure it in silence. But this was different. She had to keep going. She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and did her best to appear unaffected. I'll be right back with your drinks, she said, trying to keep her voice steady as she turned to leave. But as she took a step away from the table, a voice stopped her. Its tone cutting through the noise like a cool breeze. No rush. Why don't you sit down for a minute? Lena froze mid-step, her hand clutching the edge of the table as she looked over her shoulder. The voice was calm, measured, different from the rough taunt she had expected. She found herself staring at Ryder Cole. He had been watching her since she walked up to the table. His eyes were steady, almost soft, nothing like the sharp, mocking stares of the others. Lena hadn't noticed him at first, too focused on surviving the moment. But now that she was looking at him, she realized how much taller he was than the others. He had a muscular build, but it wasn't the bulky, intimidating kind. There was a grace in his presence, something she couldn't quite explain. His leather vest, adorned with patches, looked almost out of place on a man so calm, so in control. Lena hesitated, looking down at the floor. She was used to leaving, used to avoiding confrontation, but something in Ryder's voice made her stop. I, uh, I'm just here to take your order, Lena stammered, her nerves getting the best of her. She tried to move, to keep walking, but Ryder's gaze held her in place. It was like he was waiting for something more. No rush, he repeated, his voice warm but firm, as if he wasn't just talking to her as a waitress, but as a person. You've got a lot on your plate. Might as well take a minute. The other bikers looked at each other in confusion, unsure of Ryder's behavior. Mac raised an eyebrow while Diesel shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the shift in the atmosphere. But Ryder didn't break eye contact with Lena. His gaze was calm, and there was a strange sense of understanding behind it that made her feel, unseen for the first time in months, seen. Lena's heartbeat quickened. Her feet felt rooted to the spot. The last thing she expected tonight was for someone to show her any semblance of kindness, especially not someone like Ryder Cole, a biker surrounded by his loud, rowdy crew. She was used to being dismissed, to being invisible. But this was different. I'll sit, she finally whispered, her voice small and vulnerable. Ryder nodded and slid over slightly in the booth to make room for her. Lena hesitated, but then to her surprise, sat down on the edge of the booth, opposite Ryder. She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the tension in the air. Why do you work in a place like this? Ryder asked, his voice a little quieter now, almost as if he were asking her something personal, something important. No offense, but you don't seem like the type to put up with a job like this. Lena blinked, caught off guard by the question. It wasn't the first time someone had asked her why she worked in a diner, but this was the first time someone had asked with genuine curiosity, as though they cared about her answer. She wanted to respond, to tell him the truth, but her throat tightened and the words wouldn't come. She couldn't tell him about Derek and the kitchen staff, couldn't explain how her whole world felt like it was closing in on her. She'd always been too afraid to speak up, too afraid to be seen for who she truly was. I just need the money, Lena stammered, her voice shaking. I have plans. I have to save up. Ryder leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing just slightly in understanding. Plans, huh? He murmured as if to himself. What kind of plans? Lena didn't answer at first, unsure if she could share anything with him. But there was something in the way he looked at her, calm, patient, that made her feel safe for a split second. I want to open my own place, she whispered, more to herself than to him. A restaurant, a catering business, something where people don't look at me like I'm just here to serve them. I want to make something of myself. Ryder didn't say anything at first. He just watched her closely, his expression unreadable. Lena felt the warmth of his gaze, the weight of his silence. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, but she couldn't look away. For the first time in months, she had said what she'd been thinking, what she had kept hidden in her heart. A restaurant? Ryder finally said, his voice quieter now, almost impressed. That's a pretty big dream. A good one, though. Lena looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since she had sat down. Yeah, I guess, she said, her voice steadying. But it's just a dream right now. I've got nothing but this job to keep me going. And that's not enough. The words hung in the air between them. Ryder was quiet for a moment, just staring at her. Then he nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You know, Ryder said, you've got more courage than most people I know. You're still here, working at a place where you're treated like that, and you're still dreaming. Not a lot of people can say that. Lena's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Not in the way he said it. Not with the sincerity that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible after all. I think, Ryder continued, you've got more to offer than just catering orders in a diner. Lena looked at him, her stomach tight with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Was he just saying this to be nice? Was he humoring her? She couldn't be sure, but for the first time in a long time, she believed him. Ryder's eyes softened. I own a few businesses, you know, automotive shops. Got a few buddies who ride with me, and we've built up something decent. We didn't get here by waiting around. You don't have to wait either. You're capable of a lot more. Lena blinked. Automotive shops? She hadn't expected that. She had assumed Ryder and his crew were just bikers. Outlaws, maybe. But hearing him talk about business, about building something, made her pause. He was more than just a rough exterior, more than the leather and tattoos. There was something there, something she hadn't expected. You, you think I could do it? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ryder's smile grew, though it was small. I know you could. Lena sat back, her mind spinning. The weight of his words settled around her like a protective blanket. For the first time in a long time, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe she didn't have to be stuck in this cycle of humiliation and despair. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. And it was in that moment, with Ryder's words of respect and encouragement still echoing in her mind, that Lena began to believe that she could rise above the cruelty that had defined her life so far. Lena sat in the quiet of the staff room, her hands trembling as she flipped through the worn pages of her journal. The leather cover was scuffed and cracked, the edges of the pages frayed from months of use. It wasn't just a recipe book, as one might assume from a young woman working in a diner. This was her silent witness, the one place where she'd poured out the details of the mistreatment she had suffered at the hands of Derek Hammond, her cruel boss. No one knew about it, not even Ryder, who had shown her the first hint of kindness just the night before. The journal was a record of everything: the stolen tips, the offhand comments from Derek about her size, the days when she was given the worst shifts, the comments about how her weight was a liability. It wasn't just the physical harassment that had burned itself into her memory. It was the way Derek made her feel invisible, unworthy of respect, and like she was nothing more than a fixture in the diner, a cog in the machine he could replace at any moment. She had come to hate the place, but she stayed. Every shift was a step closer to her goal: culinary school, a chance to build something of her own. She wasn't going to let him break her. Not completely, but still she couldn't help but feel the weariness in her bones. She couldn't help but feel the weight of every cruel word and every ill treatment that had piled up over the months. It had become so normal, so expected, that she didn't even flinch anymore when Derek passed by her with his sarcastic remarks. It wasn't until last night, when Ryder had spoken to her with respect, that she realized how deep her hurt ran. No one had ever treated her like that. No one had ever seen her for who she really was, more than just a waitress, more than just a joke. She hadn't known how much she needed that until now. Lena sat up straighter as her fingers traced the edges of the journal. The pages were filled with notes about every shift, every injustice. She had documented everything, as though she knew someday she'd have to use it. The sun was beginning to set when Lena found herself seated across from Ryder in the small diner's quiet corner. She had hoped to get through the night's rush without much interaction with him, but Ryder had a way of drawing things out, gently coaxing her to share more than she'd intended. She hadn't expected to feel comfortable around him, but there was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering focus on her when they spoke, that made her feel like maybe she could open up. They were alone for a moment, the kitchen staff busy with their prep for the dinner rush. Ryder leaned back in his seat, his gaze steady, but not threatening. He looked at her with curiosity, as though he had already learned something about her without needing to ask, but still wanted to know more. "You said you've been working here for 6 months," Ryder began, his voice low and casual, "but you don't seem like the type to put up with this place. Not with the way you talked last night. What's really keeping you here?" Lena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her apron. She had learned long ago to deflect questions like that, to brush them off with a simple, "I need the money," or "I don't have a choice." But the sincerity in Ryder's eyes made her pause. He wasn't looking at her like the others did, like she was an inconvenience or a joke. He was looking at her like she mattered. I don't know." Lena's voice faltered, but she couldn't stop herself from continuing. "I guess I've been saving. I have a plan." "A plan?" Ryder leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. "What kind of plan?" Lena swallowed her throat dry. She wasn't ready to share everything. She wasn't ready to admit how hard it had been to get by, to make the choice to stay in a place that broke her down every single day. But with Ryder's quiet gaze on her, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "I've been saving tips, working double shifts. I want to go to culinary school. Start a catering business," Lena confessed, her voice trembling with vulnerability. "It's the only way out of here. I'm close, but I'm not there yet. I can't afford to lose this job." Ryder didn't speak at first. He just watched her as though weighing her words. His expression was thoughtful, as though he understood the weight of what she was saying. Lena could feel the heat rise in her chest, but she refused to look away. She had to say it. She had to admit that she didn't want to be stuck in this hellhole forever. "That's a big dream," Ryder said after a moment, his voice quieter than before. "But it's a good one." Lena nodded slowly, her heart still racing in her chest. She had dreamed of this for years, but it always seemed too far out of reach. It was a silly dream, something to cling to when the world felt heavy. It wasn't until she said it out loud that she realized how much it mattered. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier now, "but I don't think it's ever going to happen. Not if I keep working here. Derek won't let me." Ryder's eyes narrowed slightly as he listened to Lena's words. He didn't speak immediately, but it was clear that he was processing what she had said, putting together the pieces of her story. He had a way of listening that made her feel like she wasn't just another waitress telling a sob story. She could feel the weight of his consideration, and it made her both uncomfortable and oddly relieved at the same time. "Derek's the problem, isn't he?" "I'm sorry." "Isn't?" Ryder asked, his voice calm but tinged with the knowledge that he had already figured out what was going on. Lena stiffened. She hadn't expected him to make that leap so quickly. She glanced down at her hands, twisting the edge of her apron, trying to avoid Ryder's gaze. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's been making things hard. He always mocks me, makes fun of me in front of customers. He gives me the worst shifts. He makes me feel like I'm nothing." Ryder remained silent, absorbing her words. Lena continued, unable to stop herself, as if the floodgates had opened. "I've seen him do it to other people too," she confessed. "But he singles me out. He's been doing it for months, and every time I try to stand up for myself, he pushes me down further." She paused, wiping a tear away before it could fall. She didn't want Ryder to see how much it had hurt her. She didn't want to be weak. "And then there's the money stuff," Lena said, swallowing hard. "The tips he steals from us. And the inventory's messed up, but no one says anything. I don't know how much longer I can take it. Ryder's jaw tightened as he listened, his expression hardening. I figured as much, he muttered under his breath. It's the same with every bad boss. They take what they can get until the people working for them have nothing left. Lena looked up at him, surprised. You've seen this before? Ryder nodded slowly. More times than I care to count, he said, his voice steady. But I can't let it slide. Not when I see it. I don't care who the person is. No one deserves to be treated like that. Lena felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. For the first time, someone was seeing her struggle and not brushing it off as just another part of life. Ryder wasn't looking at her like she was weak or incapable. He was looking at her like he saw potential, like she mattered. I've been watching you, Lena, Ryder said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but firm. I know you've got something more inside you. You don't belong here, and I don't want to see you stay stuck. Lena blinked, startled. What do you mean? Ryder leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room for a moment before turning back to her. I've got connections, businesses, people who can help you. I'm not just a biker, Lena. I run auto shops, multiple locations. I've seen how the game works. And I know that people like you, people with the dream, just need a little push to make it out. Lena's heart skipped a beat. You, you own businesses? Ryder smiled faintly. Yeah, I didn't just get here by riding around on my bike. I've built things from the ground up. And I think you can do the same. Lena's mind raced. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected Ryder to not only listen, but to offer something more. Something that could change everything for her. But there was something in his eyes, something deep and sincere, that made her believe he meant every word. I want to help you get out of here, Lena, Ryder said, his voice steady with purpose. But first, we have to deal with Derek. We'll expose what he's been doing, the theft, the harassment, the fraud. We'll make sure he's held accountable. And then, you can finally make your dream happen. Lena felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe this was the break she had been waiting for. Maybe Ryder was right. Maybe she didn't have to stay stuck. She could have a life of her own, a future. She had never imagined it could be possible until now. Let's do it, Lena said, her voice stronger now. Let's make it happen. Ryder nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Good. We'll get started right away. Lena's world, for the first time in months, felt like it was shifting towards something better. She had a plan now, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially Derek, stand in her way. Lena had never imagined she would find herself sitting across from Ryder, surrounded by a group of bikers, discussing something as serious as the fate of her abusive boss. But here she was, in the quiet confines of the diner's back booth, her hands steady as she took notes on their plan to expose Derek's cruelty. It had started with a simple conversation, one where Ryder had shown her kindness and respect. But now, they were in it together, preparing to bring Derek's house of cards crashing down. Ryder had enlisted the help of his crew, a tight-knit group of men who, on the surface, looked like trouble. Diesel, Mac, Jax, and even some of Ryder's business associates, each one brought a unique skill to the table. Together, they were more than just a group of bikers. They were a network, a team, and they were going to help Lena uncover the truth. It was a rainy Tuesday when Ryder arrived at the diner with the first of his crew, Jax, a wiry man with a keen eye for detail. He didn't look like much, just another biker, covered in tattoos and leather, but Lena quickly realized he had a sharp mind and a quiet intensity that matched Ryder's. He was the kind of person who noticed things others missed, the type who could slip under the radar while gathering all the information they needed. All right, Lena, Ryder said one evening, his voice steady with purpose. We need to collect everything we can. You've been documenting the fraud in your journal. Now we need to see if we can match that with the numbers. We'll need footage, employee testimony, and anything else that's been slipped under the rug. Lena nodded, swallowing the knot of nerves that had formed in her stomach. For so long, she had kept her head down and stayed invisible. She had never imagined that someone would be willing to help her stand up against Derek. But now that Ryder had offered his support, it felt like a heavy weight had lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer alone. The plan was simple. Ryder and his crew would spend the next few days at the diner, discreetly gathering evidence. Jax would monitor the financial transactions, checking the books for discrepancies. Diesel and Mac would keep an eye on Derek, listening for any hints of fraud or illegal dealings. Ryder, with his business connections, would make sure the proper channels were in place to collect the evidence needed to expose Derek. Lena's job was to keep the facade going, to keep working as she always had while they gathered the information in the background. It was hard. Every day she had to face Derek's mockery, his insults, and the subtle jabs he threw at her. But now she had a purpose beyond just surviving the day. She had something to fight for. The first few days of the investigation felt like a whirlwind. Lena kept her distance from the crew, playing the part of the quiet waitress. But in her heart, she was eager to see what they would uncover. Every time she walked past Ryder or Jax, she could see the focused intensity in their eyes. They weren't just here to help her. They were here to bring justice, to expose Derek for the fraud he was. By the end of the week, the evidence was piling up. Jax had gone through the restaurant's financial records, cross-referencing them with the inventory and the orders that had been logged. The discrepancies were glaring. Overcharges to customers, manipulated bills, tips that were being funneled into Derek's pockets and not being passed on to the waitstaff. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. "I've been keeping an eye on Derek's interactions with the suppliers," Jax reported one evening, his voice low but full of certainty. "There's a lot of funny business going on. The invoices aren't matching up with the deliveries. And some of the products we're getting, they're overpriced and sometimes never even arrive. We're being skimmed, Lena. Big time." Ryder nodded, his expression darkening. "This is exactly what I thought. Derek's been running this place like a shell company, siphoning money off the top. We need to dig deeper." Meanwhile, Diesel and Mac had been gathering testimony from other employees, quietly asking around to see if anyone had seen or heard anything that could help their cause. What they found was not just fraud, it was abuse. Several employees had quit under the same conditions Lena had endured. Derek's harsh treatment had driven them away, but they had been too afraid to speak out. "I'm not surprised," Diesel muttered one night. "Everyone's too scared to say anything. He's got people trained to turn a blind eye, but you didn't turn away. You're the one who stood up to him." Lena felt a pang of pride in her chest, mixed with a deep sense of validation. For the first time, her voice and her experiences were being acknowledged, not just as complaints, but as evidence. Ryder and his crew weren't just helping her. They were helping her hold Derek accountable for everything he had done to her and to others. The more Lena learned about the fraud, the more her confidence grew. She began to understand the scope of Derek's wrongdoing, and with the evidence piling up, she started to believe that things could really change. No longer was she just a victim of circumstance. She was part of a team, a force that could take down the man who had tormented her for months. One night, after another long day of work, Ryder sat with her at the back booth of the diner, a cup of coffee in front of each of them. The diner was empty, save for a few late-night stragglers, and the kitchen was quiet. "Derek's not the only one who needs to be exposed," Ryder said quietly, his voice steady. "We've got the evidence, but we need to be careful. If we're going to take him down, we have to be smart." Lena's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Derek has his connections," Ryder explained, leaning forward. "He's been doing business with people who are just as shady as he is. We can't just walk into the police station with a stack of evidence and expect him to go down without a fight. This is bigger than just him." Lena nodded, absorbing what Ryder was saying. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been harmed by Derek's corruption, everyone who had been too afraid to stand up. "I can do this," she said, her voice stronger now. "I've been through worse. I've survived all of this. We can take him down." Ryder smiled slightly. "I knew you had it in you, Lena. That's why I'm with you. We're going to make sure Derek pays for everything he's done." As the evidence continued to stack up, Derek's behavior began to change. Ryder had made it clear that Derek's days of mistreating Lena and everyone else were numbered. The once confident, overbearing boss now seemed to be walking on eggshells around Lena and the staff. He no longer made the cruel jokes. Instead, he shot her nervous, furtive glances when he thought no one was looking. It was clear he knew the walls were closing in on him. Lena could feel the shift. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the fat girl who could be pushed around. She was a force to be reckoned with. She could see it in Derek's eyes, the panic, the fear. He knew something was coming, and he was starting to unravel. One evening after the dinner rush, Lena walked into the kitchen to find Derek alone, pacing near the stove. He didn't notice her at first, but when he turned and saw her standing there, his face flushed red. "What do you want, Lena?" he snapped, his voice high with stress. "Haven't you caused enough trouble already?" Lena stood her ground, her back straight and her hands clasped in front of her. She had the evidence now. She had the truth. "I want what's mine, Derek," she said quietly, but with a firm tone. "And I'm going to make sure everyone else gets what's coming to them, too." Derek's eyes widened in shock, and for the first time in months, Lena saw fear in his gaze. You, you don't know what you're doing," he spat, stepping toward her. "You think you can take me down? You have no idea what I've done. Who I know." "I know enough," Lena said, her voice steady, "and I'm not afraid of you anymore." The words hung in the air between them, thick with tension. Derek's hands balled into fists, but he didn't move. He knew it was over. Lena turned and walked away, the weight of what she had just said sinking in. She had finally found her voice, and it felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders. Derek was no longer the man who controlled her. She was in control now, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. As Lena walked out of the kitchen and into the dining room, she saw Ryder standing by the door, watching her with a look of quiet approval. She smiled, knowing that with his help, they were finally going to expose Derek for what he truly was. The fight wasn't over yet, but it was close. The truth was out, and Derek's days were numbered. The diner was quieter than usual, the late afternoon lull settling over the space like a heavy blanket. Lena had just finished cleaning up the counter and was wiping down the tabletops when Ryder walked in, his gaze steady and his steps measured. He didn't waste time, Yara, with the pleasantries. There was something in the air today, something that felt like a change was coming. Lena looked up from her work, her heart skipping a beat as their eyes met. Ryder's expression was serious, his jaw set as if he were about to deliver important news. "Lena," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I need you to come with me. We're going to take the next step." She paused, wiping her hands on her apron before following him. The weight of what Ryder was saying sank in slowly. She knew what he meant. They were ready. The evidence was in place. It was time to move against Derek. They met with a small group of Lena's former co-workers at a local bar. Ryder had arranged everything, quiet, discreet. The bikers were already there, sitting at a long table in the back, their usual boisterous energy tempered by the gravity of the task ahead. Diesel, Mac, and Jack sat in the corner, watching over the room, while Ryder took a seat at the head of the table. Lena felt a pang of unease as she sat down, her eyes meeting the faces of people who had been both her colleagues and her silent witnesses. There was Maria, the other waitress who had quit under Derek's harsh treatment. Greg, a cook who had been fired after confronting Derek about the broken equipment. And Alicia, a cashier who had been forced to work overtime without pay. They had all suffered in one way or another, but none of them had ever had the courage to speak out. Until now. "We've got everything we need," Ryder said, his voice steady as he looked around the table. "The financial records, the witness testimonies, the footage. We've done the work, and now it's time for you to be heard." He turned to Lena, his eyes full of quiet understanding. "You're not alone in this. You never have been. And now, we're going to make sure Derek faces the consequences of his actions." The room was silent for a moment, but the weight of Ryder's words hung heavy in the air. Lena could feel the tension building inside her. She had never imagined that this day would come, that she would have the power to take control of her own life and fight back. One by one, Ryder invited each of the former employees to speak up, to share their experiences with Derek. The testimonies were raw, emotional. Greg spoke about how Derek had humiliated him in front of the entire kitchen staff when he'd questioned the unfair scheduling. Maria recounted how Derek had made her work double shifts without proper compensation, all while belittling her appearance. Alicia talked about the countless hours she had worked without being paid overtime, and how Derek had once told her to get over it when she tried to ask for her rightful wages. Each story added weight to the growing case against Derek. As the testimonies continued, Lena felt her own resolve harden. For so long, she had stayed silent, afraid to speak up for fear of losing her job. But now, with Ryder and the bikers by her side, she realized that she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to carry the burden on her own. Derek thought he could break us, Lena said quietly, her voice firm with determination. But he can't, not anymore. Ryder nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. Exactly, we're not done yet, but we're getting closer. The next few days were a whirlwind of action. Ryder and the bikers had orchestrated a plan to expose Derek's fraud to the authorities. They worked quietly but swiftly, using their connections and influence to make sure the right people took notice. Jax had made contact with a local reporter, someone with enough sway to get the story out, while Diesel had started looking into Derek's financial dealings with his shady suppliers. By the time Ryder and his crew had everything in place, it felt like Derek's world was slowly but surely unraveling. Lena couldn't help but watch it all from the sidelines, amazed by the speed at which everything was falling into place. Her journal had been the starting point, but Ryder's influence and connections had turned it into a weapon that Derek could not avoid. The authorities had launched an official investigation into Derek's business practices, and Ryder had made sure the press was ready to follow the story. Ryder had been right. Derek wasn't just a bad boss. He was a criminal. Lena's stomach twisted as she thought about everything that had been exposed. The wage theft, the fraud, the mistreatment of employees. It was all part of a much larger operation, one that had been going on for years, and now it was crumbling. But despite the growing sense of justice, Lena couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Derek had been cruel to her, yes. He had stolen from her and treated her like nothing more than an object to mock. But he was also the reason she had a job, the reason she was able to save for culinary school. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. It wasn't until she sat down with Ryder later that night that she realized how much she had changed. She wasn't that scared girl anymore, the one who had been too afraid to stand up for herself. She was stronger now, stronger than she had ever been. "You've done it," Ryder said as they sat across from each other at a small booth in a quiet diner. "You are no longer the person you were when we started this. You've got a future now, Lena, and it's a good one." Lena looked at him, her eyes steady. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ryder's expression softened, a flicker of something in his eyes. "You didn't need me. You just needed to believe in yourself." A week later, everything changed. Lena was cleaning the counter when Ryder called her into the back office. There was a new sense of purpose in his demeanor, something that made Lena's heart race with anticipation. "You've got a choice to make," Ryder said, his voice serious. "I've been talking to some people. You've got the talent, Lena, the vision, and I want to help you make that dream of yours a reality." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "I'm offering you a deal," Ryder said, his voice steady but full of intent. "I'll back you, financially, strategically. We can open a restaurant together. I'll handle the business side of things. You focus on the menu, the vision, and making it yours. It'll be your place." Lena couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just some kind of charity offer. This was an opportunity, a chance to finally take control of her future. It was the chance she had dreamed of for so long. But doubt crept in, as it always did when she was faced with something that seemed too good to be true. "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice wavering. "I've never done anything like this before. What if I fail?" Ryder leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You're not gonna fail, Lena. You've been working for this your whole life. You've got the talent. You've got the heart. All you need is someone who believes in you, and I do." Lena swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling into her chest. She wasn't just some waitress anymore. She wasn't just a victim of a bad boss. She was a woman with a dream, a woman with potential. And for the first time, someone saw that in her. As Lena walked back to the front of the diner, a surge of power coursed through her. She wasn't just a shy, insecure waitress anymore. She had a purpose. She had a future. The shift was slow, but it was undeniable. Lena wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She could feel the change inside her, the growing confidence in her steps, in her voice, in the way she carried herself. The more Ryder believed in her, the more she believed in herself. Lena's transformation was no longer just about her job at the diner. It was about reclaiming her life, her power, and her future. And it wasn't just about the restaurant. It was about standing up to everything that had held her back for so long. The ridicule, the abuse, the belief that she wasn't worthy of something better. For the first time, Lena realized she wasn't just fighting for her dream, she was fighting for herself. As she stood there wiping down the counter, a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. She was no longer invisible, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small again. The future was waiting, and it was hers to shape. The smell of fresh paint, sawdust, and the promise of something new filled the air as Lena stood at the entrance of the building that would soon become her restaurant. It was an old, weathered space, but there was something beautiful about it, something full of possibility. The windows were dusty, and the walls needed a fresh coat of paint. But beneath the layers of neglect was a structure that could hold the dream she had carried for so long. Ryder stood beside her, his gaze sweeping across the empty space with a look of approval. He had already lined up contractors, and the work was progressing faster than Lena had imagined. His financial backing had made this all possible, but it was her vision, her passion, and her drive that would shape what came next. She was no longer the shy waitress standing at the counter of a diner. She was a businesswoman now, a partner in this venture, and it was time for her to take charge. Ryder had made it clear from the start. This wasn't just a gift. This was a partnership. Lena's ideas, her vision for the restaurant, would guide every decision from the menu to the decor. It was hers in every sense of the word, and Ryder would be there as the steady support she needed to make it work. They had spent hours together brainstorming over cups of coffee in the back booth of the diner, making plans and discussing the finer details. The restaurant would have an open kitchen, a cozy, modern feel with industrial touches, and a focus on fresh, local ingredients. Lena's heart raced with excitement as they talked about what it would feel like to finally have her own place. No more sneaking through the back door, no more hiding behind an apron. Ryder took care of the business side of things, securing permits, getting financing, and handling negotiations with suppliers. But when it came to the heart of the restaurant, that was all Lena. She spent days perfecting the menu, drawing on her years of experience in kitchens, but also her love for the food she had always dreamed of cooking. Comfort food with a twist, inspired by her upbringing and her journey. The decor came together slowly but surely, with Lena making choices that reflected who she was. The walls would be a warm, muted color, with vintage posters from local artists hanging to add personality to the space. It wasn't a luxury restaurant, nothing like Derek's high-end diner, but it would be a place where people felt welcome, where they could enjoy good food without feeling out of place. Each decision felt like a step toward reclaiming her power, each detail a reminder of how far she had come since that first humiliating night with the bikers. Lena had learned to trust herself, to make choices that felt right, even when they were difficult. As the days passed, Lena found herself slipping into a new role. She wasn't just overseeing the construction and planning the menu anymore. She was managing the whole operation. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. But Ryder was always there to offer advice and support when she needed it. Slowly, though, Lena began to feel the weight of leadership settle comfortably on her shoulders. She was the one making decisions about the layout, the staff, and the atmosphere she wanted to create. She hired a team that shared her values: hard work, integrity, and respect for the customers and each other. She didn't want a staff that was afraid of their boss or felt as though they had to hide in the shadows. She wanted people who believed in the same vision, who would work as hard as she would to make the restaurant a success. Her first hire was Sarah, the waitress who had stood by her during the worst of her time at Derek's diner. Sarah had been a quiet presence in Lena's life, someone who had never treated her with the disdain the others had. She understood what it was like to work in a toxic environment, and she was ready for a change. Lena knew she could trust Sarah, and bringing her onto the team felt like a small victory in itself. As construction progressed, Lena found herself making more decisions than she ever thought possible. She helped design the menu, picking out the right flavors, the right combinations. Ryder trusted her expertise, and soon enough it became clear that Lena was the one leading the charge. At times it was overwhelming. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when the pressure of everything felt like too much. But then she would take a breath and look around at the team she had assembled, the space that was slowly transforming into something beautiful. And she realized that this was hers. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the heart and soul of this place, and the responsibility to make it succeed was hers to carry. Ryder's crew, the bikers who had first stood by her when Derek tried to break her, were now a solid part of the restaurant's backbone. They weren't just watching over her anymore. They were partners in this venture. Diesel, Mac, Jax, and the others all chipped in, helping with everything from construction to promotion. It wasn't just their physical help either. Each biker brought something unique to the table. Diesel, with his experience in marketing and social media, helped get the word out about the restaurant. Jax, who had a background in mechanics, had an uncanny ability to fix anything that was broken, whether it was a faulty piece of equipment in the kitchen or a stubborn door that wouldn't open. And Mac, with his tough exterior, had a surprising knack for public relations. And soon enough, he was the one handling the customers when they came in to check out the progress. Together, they worked tirelessly to make Lena's vision a reality. Their support was invaluable, and it went beyond just building the restaurant. It was the constant presence of loyalty, of friendship, that made Lena realize just how far she had come from that first night when she was sent to serve the bikers as a joke. They had seen something in her and something worth protecting, and now they were helping her build something that would not only change her life, but the lives of those around her. Ryder was always there too, guiding her when she needed it, giving her space when she didn't. But as Lena started to take more charge, as she began to realize that this was her business, her future, she found herself standing on her own 2 feet, making decisions with confidence. Each day she saw the restaurant take shape, both in the physical sense and in the relationships that formed around it. This was a place where people worked together, where hard work and respect were valued above all else. Lena had learned through all her struggles that the most important thing wasn't the food. It was the culture, the atmosphere, the values that made people want to come back. And with the bikers by her side, she knew she had built something strong. The news broke shortly after the authorities launched their investigation. Derek's fraudulent activities, which had been hidden under the surface for so long, were now out in the open. The restaurant was shut down, and Derek's empire began to crumble. The pressure that had built up around him over the last few weeks finally broke through, and he had nowhere to hide. The restaurant's closure was just the beginning. The authorities found evidence of wage theft, tax fraud, and multiple safety violations. Derek was arrested, and his name became synonymous with corruption. The employees who had been too afraid to speak out before were now coming forward, their testimonies adding weight to the case against him. Lena felt a strange sense of justice as she watched it all unfold. She had been the one to document everything, to stand up when no one else would. She had been the one who had faced Derek's cruelty day after day, and now she was watching his empire fall apart. It wasn't just Derek's downfall that filled her with satisfaction. It was the knowledge that she had fought for something better, that she had been a part of something that could never be undone. The vindication didn't come immediately, though. It wasn't a sudden rush of relief or a moment of triumph. It came in small, quiet ways. The way the staff now treated each other with respect, the way Lena no longer had to hide in the shadows, the way she had taken control of her future. As Derek's criminal activities were exposed, Lena realized that this was the moment she had been waiting for. She had survived, and now she was thriving. She had earned her place in the world, and nothing was going to take that away. And just like that, the past was behind her. The day of the opening had arrived. Lena stood at the front of her restaurant, Lena's kitchen, her fingers twitching with anticipation as she adjusted her apron for the 10th time. The small space that had once seemed like a dilapidated building full of potential was now transformed into something vibrant, warm, and alive. The faint hum of activity in the kitchen, the clinking of glasses, and the soft chatter of the staff filled the air with a kind of electric energy that Lena had only ever dreamed of. It was 4:30 p.m., and the sun was beginning to dip behind the skyline. The tables were set, each adorned with simple yet elegant touches, a small candle in the center, fresh flowers on each one. The walls, once bare and dingy, were now lined with art that had been handpicked by Lena, each piece representing a piece of her journey. The open kitchen was alive with activity, the smell of fresh bread and roasting meats drifting through the air. The place was unrecognizable from its former state. It was her vision, her hard work, and the first tangible proof that everything she had fought for had been worth it. Lena's hands shook as she gazed around the restaurant, her heart pounding. She had done this. She had built something from nothing, and now it was time to open the doors. The reservation book was full, and the excitement outside was palpable. People had heard the buzz about Lena's kitchen, about the new restaurant that promised something different, something honest. But as the clock ticked down, the anxiety set in. This was it. She'd been dreaming about this day for so long, but now that it was finally here, her stomach churned with doubt. Would they like it? Would they see her vision? Would everything fall apart? "Hey," Ryder's voice cut through her thoughts, warm and steady. He stood beside her, his calm presence grounding her. "You okay?" Lena nodded, her throat tight. "I think so. Just nervous." Ryder gave her a soft smile, his hand resting on her shoulder in a reassuring gesture. "You've got this. You've been running this show from the start. Just remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about giving them an experience. And you've already done that." Lena took a deep breath, letting his words settle in. He was right. She had done the work. She had poured everything into this place. Tonight wasn't about proving anything to anyone but herself. She had built this restaurant to show the world who she was, who she had always been, and she wasn't going to let fear take that from her now. The door to the kitchen opened, and the first group of guests walked in. A wave of energy rushed over Lena, and for a moment she felt frozen. But Ryder's hand on her shoulder steadied her, and with a quick exhale, she smiled and approached the door. The night unfolded in a blur of orders, laughter, and the satisfying clink of silverware against plates. The restaurant was bustling with the energy of the grand opening, and it quickly became clear that Lena's vision was a hit. The reservations book had been filled for weeks, and tonight's guests were eager to experience what Lena had spent so many sleepless nights creating. Lena moved between the tables, greeting guests with a smile, her nerves easing with each passing moment. She could hear the chatter of satisfied customers, the occasional hum of approval as they took their first bites of food. It was all going as planned, better than planned even. At the bar, Diesel and Mac worked behind the counter, their usual gruff demeanor softened by the pride they felt in the restaurant's success. They had done everything from helping to build the space to promoting it to their network. And now they were watching it all pay off. The kitchen was alive with activity. Sarah, who had been one of Lena's first hires, was busy plating the first few orders, making sure everything was perfect. Lena checked in on her staff, offering words of encouragement and support, but also stepping back to give them the space to do their jobs. She wasn't just the owner now. She was part of this team, and she trusted them to make this night a success. It was a delicate balance of overseeing everything while not getting in the way, and Lena had quickly learned how to navigate it. She knew what needed to be done, and her hands moved with purpose, whether she was adjusting the wine list, ensuring the dessert tray was replenished, or managing the front of the house. As the evening wore on, Lena's confidence continued to grow. The customers were enjoying the atmosphere, the food, the service. It felt like a dream, but it was real. The diners at each table spoke to her about their experiences, offering compliments on the food and the ambiance. A sense of warmth and pride filled Lena, and for the first time that night, she felt a deep connection to the place. She moved through the restaurant with more ease now, her nerves nearly forgotten. Ryder was still by her side, offering words of encouragement when needed but allowing Lena to lead. He had stepped back into the role of advisor, supporting her decisions without overshadowing her. It was clear that this was her moment, her restaurant, her future. As the night progressed, the crowd grew and the restaurant began to hum with a different kind of energy, the kind that comes with success, with the sense that something truly special is unfolding. But for Lena, there was still a voice in the back of her head, one that whispered doubts. What if it all falls apart? What if they don't like it? But each time the doubt crept in, she reminded herself of Ryder's words. It's not about being perfect. It's about giving them an experience. As the clock ticked on, Lena's fears began to fade. She was no longer just managing the restaurant. She was embodying it. Every decision she made, from how the plates were presented to the way she interacted with her customers, felt instinctive now. She was in control. She was no longer hiding behind the apron or the walls of a dingy diner. She was running her own show. By the time the last customers had finished their meals and the restaurant began to clear out, Lena stood in the center of the dining room, surveying the scene. The staff was cleaning up, the lights were dimming, and the music was turning off. It had been a long night, but it had been a success. Ryder walked up to her, a small smile on his face. You did it. Lena felt the weight of his words sink in. We did it. The two of them stood there for a moment, looking around at the emptying restaurant. It had gone better than she could have imagined, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to come. You okay? Ryder asked, his voice soft but full of concern. Lena nodded, her eyes meeting his. Yeah, I think I'm just starting to realize what this means. This is mine. This is really happening. Ryder smiled, his expression warm. And you've got a lot more to come. This place, it's only the beginning. People are going to hear about this. Ryder's role in this venture had always been clear, but as Lena took charge and began to find her rhythm, their partnership shifted. He wasn't just her backer anymore. He was her partner in every sense of the word. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet respect that had formed over the weeks of planning and working together. Ryder didn't need to hover over her. He trusted her to make the right decisions, to build this restaurant into something that could stand on its own. But it wasn't just the restaurant that was growing, it was their relationship too. What had started as a business partnership had evolved into something deeper, something more personal. Lena had never imagined that someone like Ryder, someone who seemed so distant and untouchable when they first met, could become such an important part of her life. But now, as they stood together at the end of the night, sharing in the success of Lena's kitchen, it felt natural. There was a bond between them, one that went beyond business. It was built on respect, on shared goals, and on the unspoken understanding that they each brought something essential to the table. Ryder had been her protector, her guide, and now he was someone she could truly count on. And the more they worked together, the more Lena realized that their connection was growing into something more than just a professional partnership. But for now, she was focused on the restaurant, on the future she was building. The rest could come later. As the staff finished cleaning, Lena stood by the door, her hands clasped in front of her, watching them leave. The restaurant was hers now. It was real. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time, Lena felt ready for whatever came next. And as she looked over at Ryder, standing across the room, his gaze meeting hers, she knew they were both in this together. Whatever came next. Lena sat at her desk in the small office behind the kitchen, watching the hum of the restaurant around her. The sound of clinking dishes, the chatter of customers, and the sizzling of ingredients being plated. Everything felt alive. Her heart swelled with pride as she looked around Lena's kitchen. The place that had once been nothing more than a pipe dream, now brimming with success and warmth. It had been 6 months since the grand opening. In that short time, Lena's kitchen had become a local favorite, a place where people not only came to eat, but also to experience something more, a culture of respect, kindness, and great food. What started as a simple vision had transformed into a thriving business, and now Lena found herself at a crossroads. The restaurant had become a hit, with a growing list of loyal customers who appreciated not only the food but also the atmosphere Lena had worked so hard to cultivate. Word of mouth had spread, and soon enough, the place was packed every night. Reservations were now booked weeks in advance, and people came from neighboring towns just to try her menu. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she had ever imagined possible. But as the restaurant's success grew, so did the pressure. Lena knew that now was the time to take the next step, to expand and build on what they had already created. She had always dreamed of having multiple locations, of growing her business while keeping the same standards and values that had made the restaurant so special. It started with a simple thought, one that came to her late one evening while she stood behind the counter looking out at the crowd. What if we could do this again? She had spent so many years working towards this moment, the chance to build something of her own. But now she could feel the urge to keep pushing, to take what she had built and grow it into something that could reach even more people. She didn't just want to have a successful restaurant. She wanted to have a legacy, a place where people could find comfort and community. Lena took a deep breath and walked over to the small dry erase board on the wall. It was filled with reminders, schedules, and notes about daily specials. But today, she added something new. A small, simple line, expansion, plan for second location. It was a bold move, a risky one, but it felt right. Ryder had always said that success came from not waiting for the perfect moment, but creating the right one. And this was the right moment. Ryder had been supportive of the idea from the beginning. He had seen the growth of the restaurant firsthand, and he knew that it was time to expand. But there was still so much to do. They needed to find the right location, secure financing, and hire new staff, people who would uphold the values that Lena's Kitchen had become known for. As Lena sat at her desk, sketching out plans and making notes for the new location, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come. From that shy, insecure waitress at Derek's diner to the owner of a thriving restaurant, she had defied the odds. She had built something that was now bigger than just a business. It was a movement that stood for integrity, fairness, and great food. She could feel the excitement bubbling inside her, but there was also a sense of responsibility. She wasn't just expanding a business, she was expanding an idea, and she wanted to do it right. As Lena's Kitchen grew, so did her relationship with Ryder. What had started as a business partnership had slowly evolved into something much deeper, something that neither of them had expected. They had shared so much in the last few months, the long hours, the struggles, the victories, and in that time their bond had only strengthened. Ryder was there every step of the way, offering support and guidance when Lena needed it, but always allowing her the space to make her own decisions. He never pushed, never tried to take control. He respected her autonomy, her drive, and the way she had turned Lena's Kitchen into something special. But as they spent more time together, working late into the night on plans for the second location or discussing business strategies over coffee, the lines between professional and personal began to blur. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance here, a quiet smile there. But soon Lena realized that her feelings for Ryder were no longer just about gratitude or admiration. There was something more, something deeper. She had come to rely on him, not just for his business acumen, but for his presence, his calm demeanor, and the way he made her feel seen and valued. Ryder, too, had changed. He had always been a strong, steady force in her life, but now there was a tenderness in the way he looked at her, a quiet protectiveness that went beyond business. He was proud of her, not just as a business partner, but as a woman who had overcome so much to get to where she was. And as much as he admired her strength and determination, he had also started to care for her in ways he hadn't expected. One evening, after a long day at the restaurant, they found themselves sitting together on the patio, watching the sunset as the restaurant buzzed with activity inside. Lena leaned back in her chair, looking at the sky, lost in thought. "I've been thinking," she said softly, breaking the silence. "About what?" Ryder asked, turning his attention to her. "About the second location," she replied. "I think I'm ready, but I don't want to rush it. I want to make sure we do it right." Ryder smiled, his eyes warm. "You've got the right instincts. We'll do it together like we always have." Lena smiled back, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. Ryder had been her rock, her guide, and now she realized he was becoming something more, someone she couldn't imagine her life without. As the evening wore on, the conversation drifted to more personal matters. They talked about their hopes, their dreams, and the things they had never shared with anyone else. The connection between them was undeniable, and as Lena looked at Ryder, she couldn't help but wonder if he was feeling the same way. What if we Lena began, her voice trailing off. She wasn't sure how to say what was on her mind, but Ryder's gaze softened, and he reached for her hand across the table. I think I know what you're asking, he said gently. And I've been thinking about it too. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. It was the moment Lena realized that whatever they were building together, whether it was the restaurant or something more, it was real. And she wasn't afraid of it anymore. As Lena's kitchen continued to thrive, word of its success spread beyond the restaurant itself. People in the community took notice, not just of the food, but of the values that Lena had worked so hard to instill in her business. Other local businesses began to reach out, asking for advice on how to create a more positive work environment, how to treat their employees with the same respect that Lena showed hers. Her story became an inspiration to others who had suffered in toxic workplaces. And Lena found herself becoming an advocate for workplace fairness and integrity. The local news began to take notice too. Lena was featured in a small story about the success of her restaurant and her commitment to ethical business practices. The reporter called her a local hero for standing up to Derek's abusive practices and for creating a space where both employees and customers felt valued. Lena wasn't sure how to feel about the attention. She hadn't set out to be a hero. She had just wanted to create a space where she, and others like her, could thrive. But as the story spread, Lena realized that her journey had become something much bigger. She was no longer just a waitress who had dreamed of something better. She was a voice for change, someone who had taken control of her own destiny and was showing others that it was possible to do the same. Her story resonated with so many people, and soon she found herself giving talks to other restaurant owners, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to treat their employees with the same respect she had worked so hard to instill in Lena's kitchen. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about creating a culture of fairness, respect, and opportunity. And Lena was at the forefront of that movement, inspiring others to take a stand, to do better, and to believe that they too could build something meaningful. Lena stood in the kitchen that evening, looking out at the bustling restaurant, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just a place where people came to eat. It was a place where people came to belong. And as she looked around at her staff, at Ryder standing just beyond the kitchen door, her heart whispered what her mind had been too afraid to say before. This was just the beginning. Lena stood in the center of the bustling restaurant, the familiar hum of conversation and clink of silverware filling the air. It was a sight she had once only dreamed of, her vision coming to life in the form of Lena's kitchen. The second location, much like the first, was thriving. The once empty, cold space had been transformed into a vibrant, welcoming restaurant, full of energy, delicious aromas, and people eager to experience the food and atmosphere that had earned Lena her reputation. She glanced around the room, taking it all in. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched her team work seamlessly together. Customers smiling and chatting with each other, and the kitchen staff moving in coordinated precision. This was no longer just a place where she had found refuge from a toxic past. It was now a cornerstone of the community, a place where people came not just for a meal, but for a sense of belonging. The last few months had been a whirlwind of growth, but Lena had always known she could handle it. She had earned every step of this journey. From the day she first stood in the dimly lit corner of that old diner, invisible and weighed down by ridicule, to this moment, standing as a successful businesswoman, a respected leader in her community, Lena had come a long way. As the dinner rush continued, she slipped into the small office in the back of the restaurant to check on a few things. Her fingers hovered over the files and papers that were now part of her daily routine. Staff schedules, inventory lists, financial reports. There was a sense of satisfaction in it all, the certainty that everything was moving as it should. But Lena knew that it wasn't just about the food or the restaurant anymore. This was about her legacy, the impact she was leaving behind, not just as a business owner, but as someone who had inspired change, who had proved that perseverance and hard work could rewrite a person's story. The first Lena's Kitchen had already become a local favorite, and now, with the second location up and running, her presence in the community was undeniable. She had gone from being the fat girl, mocked by Derek Hammond, to being a local hero, someone people admired for her courage, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to creating a better, more respectful work environment. As her reputation grew, so did her influence. Lena had become an advocate for workplace fairness, hosting events for other business owners, encouraging them to adopt ethical business practices, and showing them that success didn't have to come at the expense of their employees. She had worked hard to build a business that wasn't just about profits, but about people, the ones who worked for her and the ones who came to her restaurant, hungry not just for food, but for a sense of community. Her name was becoming synonymous with integrity in the business world. Lena was invited to give talks at local schools where she shared her story of overcoming adversity and the importance of hard work and kindness in building a business. She was interviewed by local news outlets, her story of transformation resonating with so many who had once felt overlooked, underappreciated, or powerless. But Lena knew that there was still more to do. She wasn't finished. The restaurant's success was just the beginning. The future was wide open, full of possibilities she had once thought impossible. With the success of the second location, Lena had set her sights on further expansion, with plans to open more locations in neighboring cities. She wanted to create something that wasn't just a business. It was a movement, a symbol of what it meant to take control of your life, your dreams, and your future. And through it all, Ryder had been by her side, supporting her, encouraging her, and showing her that there was more to life than just surviving. It was about thriving. It was late one evening after closing time when Ryder found Lena in her office, staring at the plans for the next phase of expansion. He knocked on the door frame before stepping in, his tall frame filling the doorway. "You look like you've been at this for hours," he said, his voice gentle. "You need a break, Lena." Lena looked up from the papers, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'm fine, just going over some ideas for the next location. We're expanding quickly, and I want to make sure everything is in place before we take on more." Ryder walked into the room and sat down across from her, his eyes soft but steady. There was something different in the air tonight, a sense of anticipation, as if the words he was about to speak were weighing on him. "You've done something incredible here, Lena," Ryder said, his voice thick with pride. "You've built something that people care about, something that matters." Lena smiled, but her heart fluttered at his words. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ryder chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, you did this. You built it. But I'm here for the ride." Lena's eyes softened as she leaned back in her chair. She had grown so much since that first day they had met. The scared, insecure waitress who had been sent to face humiliation, now standing tall as a businesswoman. Ryder had seen it before anyone else. He had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. After a brief silence, Ryder's expression grew serious, and he took a deep breath as if preparing to speak words that had been sitting on his mind for a while. "I've been thinking," he began, "about us, about this business, what we've built together." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, searching his face for clues. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. "I think it's time for us to make this more official," Ryder said, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm offering you an equal stake in the business, Lena. A partnership. We've been working side by side, and it's time you got the recognition you deserve for all the hard work you've put in. This isn't just my business anymore. It's ours." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had expected many things from Ryder: support, guidance, and encouragement. But this was more than she could have imagined. She had always dreamed of owning her own restaurant, but now she was being offered a true partnership, a seat at the table where decisions were made, where the future was shaped. Her mind raced. She had come so far from a waitress who had been pushed around to a business owner who now had the chance to build her future, alongside someone who saw her as an equal. But there was something else there, too, something that had grown between them, unspoken but undeniable. It was in the way Ryder looked at her, the quiet moments they shared after hours, the bond that had deepened over the course of their partnership. It was no longer just about business. It was about trust, respect, and something more. "I don't know what to say," Lena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. This, this means everything to me." Ryder smiled, the same warm, steady smile she had come to rely on. You don't have to say anything, Lena. You've already proven everything that needs to be proven. As Lena walked through the second location of Lena's kitchen, a wave of gratitude washed over her. She paused in the middle of the dining room, taking in the warm, inviting space. The walls were lined with photos from her journey, the diner that had started it all, the team that had worked so hard to build this, and the faces of customers who had become loyal patrons over the months. Her fingers lightly traced the edge of the countertop, and her mind drifted back to that first night of the grand opening. The nervous anticipation that had filled her. She had been so unsure, so afraid of failing. And yet, here she was, standing in the second successful location of her restaurant, ready for even more growth. Looking around, Lena reflected on everything she had overcome. She had started as a quiet, invisible waitress in a place where she was treated like less than human. She had endured years of ridicule and mistreatment, and yet she had fought back. She had found her voice, and with Ryder's unwavering support, she had created something that was now flourishing. It wasn't just the food that had made Lena's Kitchen a success. It was the culture, the values, the way people treated each other. The restaurant had become more than just a business. It had become a symbol of what it meant to persevere, to stand up for yourself, and to create something that made a difference in the world. And now, as she looked at the future that was unfolding before her, Lena realized that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to do, so many more lives to impact. She wasn't just building a restaurant empire. She was building a legacy. With Ryder by her side and her heart full of determination, Lena stepped forward. She was ready for whatever came next. After all, this was her future, hers to shape, hers to create, and hers to lead. The journey had come full circle, and Lena knew without a doubt that she was just getting started. Thanks for watching. If you loved Lena's journey from waitress to business owner, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Share this video with someone who needs a little extra motivation today. And if you want to see more of Lena's incredible story, drop a comment below or let us know what you'd love to see next. Until next time, stay empowered and keep chasing your dreams.